Okay, before we jump into this lecture about box sizing and round corners in CSS3, I want to just get you set up here. So create a new folder on your desktop called CSS3, and then I need you to add an HTML file called box.html, add your basic structure and the Internet Explorer conditional comment, and add a style sheet called style.css and link to it in your head tag here to your style.css. And you might be wondering, what is this normalized.css file that we have here? Well, if you can recall, before we used to do a simple CSS reset that looked something like this. And we would just have something like margin 0, padding 0, so on and so forth. But that's a little too simple because there are a lot of elements and a lot of things that would be nice to kind of reset so that everything's consistent in all the browsers, because every browser treats CSS a little differently. And so there's something called normalized.css. And normalized.css is basically a modern HTML5 ready alternative to CSS resets. So basically it makes all the browsers render the elements more consistently and in line with modern standards. And when you click download, it just takes you to the CSS file, and you just want to select all this and copy it and add a new file in your folder here, just called normalized.css. And just paste it in there. And once you've pasted it, all you have to do is just link it up in your head here. And then basically that just makes all the elements render consistently. So if I were just to show you a couple samples here, we got the level 1 heading, we have a level 2 heading. And you could see that it just kind of has, it's kind of reset things. So the margins are kind of, they're not to 0. They're actually, the reason why everything's not set to 0 is because it's not really necessary, because if you take all that away, you have to add it in again later. This just makes it a bit more consistent. And you can feel free to just look through the CSS file to see what it's doing, just out of curiosity. But anyway, once you've added that, we're pretty much good to go. Now in CSS3, there are a couple cool things that are added in CSS3 that we didn't have in CSS 2.1 and below, which is what we've been working with so far. But CSS3 lets you do a lot of really cool things that you wish you knew about all the previous lectures. So there's something in CSS3 called box sizing. We've been playing around with box sizing before, but CSS3 adds a couple new features that makes it easier. Do you remember when you add a box and you have to account for the padding and the width together? So let's just give this div the ID of box. And we go down here and let's just give it some basic styles so you can see it. Okay, so we have this box here, red box, 200 pixels, and just centered in the middle of the browser here. Now, if we wanted to add padding to this box, like so, let's say we added 50 pixels on all sides, you could see the box increased in size by technically 100 pixels on all sides. It's 100 pixels taller and 100 pixels wider because we're adding 50 pixels on all sides. So in theory, this box is actually 300 by 300 pixels. So if you wanted this box to still be 200 by 200, you'd have to change it to 100 by 100 to account for the padding. So now it's 200 by 200. Kind of annoying, right? And kind of a little backwards. It doesn't really seem to make sense. But in CSS3, you can do something. There's a property called box sizing. Box sizing gives you the ability to choose a value called a border box, which basically keeps everything the way that you would think it should go. So the height and width is 200 pixels, and it has a 50 pixel padding. So now technically, if I were to put text in here, some text in here, you could see it has its 50 pixels of padding on the top, right, bottom, and left. Whereas before, when we didn't have border box, we have our 50 pixels of padding, but it increases the height and the width because of the padding. So box sizing border box lets you keep it constrained within the height and width. Cool CSS, little CSS3 trick that you will no doubt be using in the upcoming lectures and also kind of just in your future web development career. Okay, another cool thing about CSS3 are the round corners. Before, if you wanted to do a round corner, you needed to create a round corner in Photoshop and export it as a background image and input it in your CSS as a background image so it would appear that you have round corners. But it's kind of a tedious process, takes a long time just to simply create round corners. But in CSS3, you don't have to worry about that because all you have to do is say border radius, and then you could just decide the radius of the border. So let's say 100 pixels. Well, see, now we created a circle because all of the corners have 100 pixels of border radius. Let's do something more subtle, like 10 pixels. Now we have 10 pixels of border radius on all sides. We could do something like 50 pixels and it's a bigger border radius. What if you wanted to select one corner rather than all of the corners? Well, that's simple. You could do something like border bottom left radius, 100 pixels. And now we have the border bottom left radius, 100 pixels. Or we can make it look cool by saying something like border top right radius and 100 pixels. And now we have this kind of cool like little shape here. And now if I wanted to create like a raindrop shape, I would just do something like border bottom right radius, 100 pixels. And now we have like a teardrop or like a raindrop shape. And that's pretty cool. Simply done in CSS3. Now, not all CSS3 properties work in all browsers. Internet Explorer has some catching up to do, although the latest versions I think are pretty good. Some older versions of Firefox and Safari and Chrome don't render these all the same. You have to use browser prefixes in some cases. So, for example, this is what a browser prefix would look like. WebKit border radius, 100 pixels. That would give you, as you saw there, the radius. I'll remove these just as kind of proof. WebKit border radius, because Chrome is a WebKit browser, it renders this properly. So Chrome, the latest version, does work with just the standard border radius property, but as a fallback, you should use the border or the browser prefixes, which look like this: Moz border radius. And this would give you on Mozilla browsers like Firefox, the border radius on those browsers for older ones. And that's kind of how that works. But all you really need to do is just look the browser prefixes up, and that will give you all the prefixes that you need to make it cross-compatible. Here on the w3schools.com website, you can see the browser support. Right here, we got WebKit, Moz, and WebKit for Safari as well, which I just kind of showed you. And those will just let you work with older versions like Safari 3.1, Firefox 2.0, and Chrome 4.0, so on and so forth. And so that is your border radius and your box sizing properties in CSS3.